Grain sits in a wooden bowl, pale and dry, each husk closed tight around what it hides. It gives no smell yet, no warmth, no shape a person could call food. It waits the way stone waits, patient and unremarkable, until something forces it open. A hand tips it toward a quern, two flat stones, one turning against the other, and only then does it begin to change. This grain is not breakfast. It's the first test of the entire day. A woman kneels beside the hearth before first light, and she is not one person, but many. Every household across this land keeps someone doing exactly this. She reaches for the iron pot hanging from its chain above the fire, the same pot that will carry this household through the whole day's cooking. It is dented, blackened with years of smoke, and utterly essential. There is no oven built into a wall here, no separate burner for each task. One fire, one hanging pot, and the constant negotiation of what goes in and when. She swings the pot lower over the flames, and the fire seems to lean up to meet it, hungry and obliging, wrapping the black iron in orange light. Into the pot goes water, then a handful of the coarse meal ground moments before at the quern, then a pinch of salt kept dear and used carefully. This will become pottage, a thick, simmered grain stew that carries the household through the coldest hours. She stirs with a long wooden spoon, watching the grains soften, swell, break down into something the body can actually use. There is no clock to consult. She reads the pot itself, the thickening of the liquid, the way bubbles rise slower as the mixture gains body. And she has read this same pot for years. Onions, when there are any, go in early, so their sharpness gentles into sweetness. A bone from yesterday's meat, if the household has one, goes in for its fat and its flavor, then comes back out before serving. This is not a recipe copied from a book. Almost no one here can read, and there are no cookbooks in any case. This is knowledge carried in the hands, passed from an older cook to a younger one, through repetition, correction, and taste. Step outside that single hearth, and the whole settlement hums with the same essential labor, repeated in a dozen variations. Nearby, another figure turns the quernstones herself, grinding rye or barley into the meal that will become tomorrow's bread and today's pottage both. It is slow, punishing work, done by hand, hour after hour, and it never really stops. A household eats through what it grinds almost as fast as it can grind it. Bread here is not the soft sliced loaf a modern eye expects. It's dense, dark, chewy, baked directly on a flat hearthstone or in a low clay oven built into the yard. Its crust often gritty with tiny flecks of stone worn loose from the quern. That bread is not a side dish. It's the calorie backbone the whole day's labor depends on. Elsewhere in the same yard, someone tends the dairy animals, a cow, or more commonly for a modest household, sheep or goats, because milk here means far more than a drink. It means cheese and butter, foods that can be made today and eaten weeks or months from now, when fresh milk is long gone and winter has closed in. The milk is left to sour and thicken, then worked by hand, curds separated from whey, pressed and salted, and set aside to firm into cheese that will keep. Butter comes from churning cream, patiently, rhythmically, until the fat finally separates from the liquid around it. None of this is casual. Preserved dairy is often the difference between a lean winter and a genuinely hungry one. And this is where the household's real skill shows itself, not in any single dish, but in a scattering of quiet techniques for making food last far longer than nature intends. Meat and fish that can't be eaten immediately are salted heavily, packed in barrels or hung to dry, drawing out the moisture that would otherwise let them rot. Some fish and meat are smoked over the same hearth fire, low and slow, the smoke itself acting as a kind of invisible preservative, sealing the surface and discouraging decay. Vegetables and fruits that would spoil within days are pickled in brine or preserved in honey, both of which stop the bacteria that cause rot in its tracks. And grain itself, given water, warmth, and time, is coaxed into malt or fermented into ale, a slow, deliberate transformation that turns barley from a stiff, barely digestible seed into something the body can break down easily, and turns plain water into a drink safer to consume than much of the water drawn straight from a well or stream. This is not luck. It's inherited chemistry, understood through generations of trial, long before anyone has a word for yeast or bacteria. The fire that smokes the meat seems almost deliberate in its patience, curling low and steady rather than roaring, as though it understands that haste here would ruin the very thing it's meant to preserve. But stores this carefully built can vanish in a single bad season. A wet harvest can rot grain in the field before it's even cut. A cow that sickens means no milk, no cheese, no butter for months. A fire left untended too long can scorch a whole pot of pottage that was meant to feed everyone until evening. What happens to a household whose grain store runs low before the next harvest even ripens? There is no shop to visit, no neighbour guaranteed to have extra. A poor autumn can mean a hard, hungry spring, and everyone in the household knows it. By the time the pot comes down from its chain, the sun has moved well across the sky, and the woman who set water to simmer at dawn is no longer working alone. The household gathers, children, elders, whoever has spent the day at the quern, in the dairy yard, tending the smoke fire out back. The same pot that began the day holding nothing but grain and water now holds a thick, dark stew, fragrant with onion and fat, thickened by hours of patient heat. Bread baked that morning is broken by hand and passed around. There are no individual plates for most people here, often just a shared loaf, a shared pot, and spoons or simply crusts of bread used to scoop. Cheese made weeks earlier appears alongside it, proof that the dairy work back in spring or summer has paid its due. Ale, brewed and fermented days or weeks before, is poured out to drink, safer and more nourishing than plain water might be. Nothing on this table arrived quickly. Every part of it, the grain, the milk, the salted meat, the malted barley, passed through someone's hands, through fire or brine or patient time before it became food at all. Across the wider settlement, other households are doing precisely the same thing at this same hour, each with their own pot, their own hearth, their own version of this exact, quiet ritual. No single family stands apart from this pattern. This is simply how an entire people ate, day after day, across an entire era. That blackened iron pot, hanging now half-emptied over a dying fire, holds the truest measure of what survival meant here. Not drama, not danger, but the steady, inherited skill of turning raw, unpromising things into a meal that could carry a household through to tomorrow.